Good morning and welcome to the School Edit Part 2 of 2. I'm Terry Clement. I'm with the E3 Alliance and I'm here with my colleagues, Leticia Maynard, Allison Duran, and Marco Pisania. And we are super excited that you've joined us today for the second part in our series focused on creating systems to start strong and then making priorities stick through effective PD and support. We're super glad that you're with us, and a PDF of the slides today will be made available for you. So if you registered for the webinar and you're watching it, you should have received a link to those slides. Otherwise, we'll be adding them in the chat today. But thank you so much for joining us. Today, we will be sharing some learning and some ideas with you for the School Edit Part 2. And again, I'll be sharing the first part, and then I will be joined by Allison Duran for the second half of our shared learning today. So glad that, again, that you're with us. E3 Alliance is a nonprofit. We are in Central Texas, but we support schools and districts across Texas. Our mission is transforming education systems through data and collaboration so all students succeed. And we are excited to share these ideas that are part of our work and really a part of serving that mission so we can achieve that vision of success for all students. Let's jump right in, and I want to review just a few points from part 1 of this series about building systems for your focused priorities. As school leaders, we want to keep in mind that we have a mission and a vision, not just so we can check that box or have things as wallpaper, we like to say, on our websites or on our walls, but really the vision is what it looks like if we're successful in our work for our students, and the mission is how we're going to get there. And so when we focus on our priorities and build systems to ensure implementation around those priorities and the goals that we set therein, we really want to think about the prioritization as part of the fuel that really makes sure that we move along and make progress towards that vision by serving our mission. But the priorities are the thing that really makes the journey happen, as this visual kind of really lets us see. Also in part 1, we guided you through a process that we recommend and use in our work, and that begins with organizing a team because the who involved, the shared voice, is pivotal, and that makes the brainstorming rich, the narrowing of a focus and finding those priorities means that it's a team effort, and it's even more powerful when you go to message that as a leader down the line. And the other reason we know that the prioritization is a fuel for making things happen for you and your school and your students is really driven home by this point from Dr. Brene Brown, who says quite distinctly, if you have more than 3 priorities, then you don't have any priorities. So that's a hard lesson to learn. And with so much to do in our schools, it's super important that we don't get lost in that reactive learning every day, but we stay focused on those priorities and show up every day with that intention to stay aligned with what we know is important when we get this clarity through a process like this one. As we go through part 2 today, I want to recall the example that we used in part 1 and will continue to use today. In part 1, we went through that prioritization process with a model middle school, E3 Alliance Middle School. So for the 2023-24 school year, in this example, the team worked together to really make sure they were aligned with the vision and the mission of this school, determined what they value, what was important, and they really focused in on three priority areas for this school year. And for the example today, we're actually going to center on one of them and walk you through a process of how we would build a system to ensure implementation of the work in that priority area. So this priority is focused around collaboration for effective Tier 1 instruction. That's instruction for all students uh, that you serve in your school. And we're going to accomplish that by implementing a new practice of lesson rehearsals. So if that is the selected priority, then let's set about building a system for that. We introduced in part one this idea of a system, and these are the four components of a system. We'll walk through them in detail today, but just a reminder that if it is indeed a system, there is a detailed document that we can point to, a document that exists independent of any one person or personality or role. And that is why systems keep us on the same page when we're not in the same room, because of that detailed document. Beyond that, the other components are to take the details in that document, communicate them both frequently and with clarity. So it's not enough to say things and pass out a document in August and then never support it again. So to do that, we have to make sure that we have a plan to continuously communicate and keep things clear. As again, Dr. Brene Brown tells us, clear is kind, and that's how we get stuff done. We don't want anything in our way, including a lack of clarity. And then we set about supporting the system through professional learning and then ongoing monitoring and feedback. That professional learning, by the way, and we'll dig in the details in a bit, is also ongoing. So yes, we have some upfront PD we do at the beginning of the school year, but we want to think about how we continue to support, because we know that to get things into practice in our classrooms, we have to continue learning them, practicing them, and moving them into our rituals and our practice. So let's zero in, just pulling up, this is a lot of text, but remember, if you have the slide set, you can reference the details of this text later, but this is your checklist. If you're wondering why something isn't working, or if you're planning ahead to make sure that implementation will be effective, this checklist will go a long way to getting you there. And we're going to start by focusing first at the beginning of this system to support that priority, and that is to build a detailed document. This is an example. Remember, our example priority statement is focusing on collaboration for effective Tier 1 instruction through a practice of lesson rehearsals. So a detailed document developed by the leadership team for this campus of this new practice. And remember, it is a detailed document if it has these components. Do I know who is involved? These are expectations. Who are these expectations for? Who will hold everyone accountable? What are we talking about? What are the actions and the work involved? And also how and when exactly does that work take place, so that everything can be crystal clear. Next, moving on to the next part of ensuring that this is a system to support the work of that priority that we've identified, and that is communicating. So communication, of course, is just a few pro tips on that to make sure that it is, yes, written, posted, but also that it's consistently worked into ongoing leadership messaging. Leaders speak with their actions and their words. So if you are, as a school leader, are often referencing the things that are a priority, then it's going to become more and more evident that that is what we focus on. frequently referencing the detailed document, and also making sure that other people are involved in that messaging. So it can be a fairly complex process. And for that reason, we're going to bring in a graphic that really honors that complexity. So here we have a leadership system calendar for supporting whatever it is we're trying to implement. So this will be a full year's calendar, and a whole lot of the actions that we're going to be talking about today are on it. But right now, I'm just going to zero in on those parts of it that involve communication. And that's a whole lot of it, right? So not only is communication involved when we engage in shared learning together, so that's why the professional learning events are also still on the timeline here in this particular version, but also when we are reiterating those expectations as leaders. And then when we also, in the green boxes, you'll see our periodic meetings of leadership teams to talk about how things are going. So in this instance, it would be about meeting on lesson rehearsals, and that as an initiative, as a focused priority for the school year. So PD, direct communication, and also leadership teams communicating with each other to monitor how things are going along the way. So all of that ongoing communication will help ensure a systematic approach to a successful implementation. Just kind of a deeper example of what a beginning professional learning would look like. And that is really getting together and planning at the beginning of a professional learning event. So this is perhaps when you're welcoming everyone back, and you want to message about those priorities, being very clear about welcome back. Thank you for being a part of this work. Here's our mission, vision, what we value, what we've committed to, and this is our priority for the year. This is where we're focusing our work. And really messaging that quite clearly, having people interact so that they're not just hearing it, but also having a moment to process it with each other as a staff, as a professional learning community is critical. So that's that really clear communication example at the beginning of the year, but it's just the beginning of the communication story, as that previous graphic let us know. The next step would be going on to make sure that that is supported. So whatever we're prioritizing, in this case, in this example, the lesson rehearsals, we'd go on to provide high quality, effective professional learning that includes those elements on the checklist. So I'm going to go into more detail about those in just a moment, but really want to zero in on not just professional learning, but high quality, effective professional learning focused on the priorities that you set with that team through that process. Once again, I'm going to bring up the full calendar of support for a full school year, and I want to zero in on the professional learning, where that detailed document is involved. And so when we're building this system, we have an initial PD, of course, welcome back. Here's this we're engaging in, whether it's new or returning, but we want to learn about it at the beginning of the year and then plan for those follow-ups, because what we know is one and done or just beginning of the year initial upfront PD only is not something that's going to lead to effective classroom implementation. So if we really want to see things make it all the way to benefiting students, we need to plan for relearning along the way and opportunities to reflect and to rehearse and practice and get better and get feedback. So all of that planned out from the beginning of the year is critical to make sure that those things get on the calendar. A deeper example of how the professional learning would go. Remember, what I showed you before was that beginning communication. Here's what we're learning today. Here's why it's important. Here's the messaging, here's our commitment, here's how it aligns with who we are and what our mission and our vision is for our students. And then the rest of the effective, high quality professional learning could be focused like this, perhaps a blend of a model of how lesson rehearsals go, combined with the activities and time to plan for implementing the lesson rehearsals. I do want to show you an example. Again, this is super detailed and you'll have it in your slides, but this is an example of how you would plan for a high quality, effective professional learning. I think what I would zero in on here is the example has the exact time down to the minute. So every minute that you have of shared professional learning with your staff, whether it's the beginning of the year or in meetings, wherever you can grab the time throughout the year. All of that to be planned very intentionally and purposefully with structure, and also make sure materials and resources are provided, provide anchors for your learners, use all the effective PD practices that you have in place in your campus, especially if they're shared practices across the campus. And then finally, that accountability, how we ensure that staff are reflecting on their learning and that they're accountable for implementing it beyond that professional learning. And again, it's just more than just making some slides, right? So that the reason that plan is so detailed is because anytime, especially if it's in person, if we are shoulder to shoulder, that is time that we need to be taking advantage of to learn together, and super critical for success in both building your culture and also moving the work of your professional learning community forward. So keep that in mind when you're planning for those learning experiences, again, whether it's the beginning of the school year or ongoing. And then also, if you're going to just a quick deep dive into what's in that PD lesson plan, um, planning for every moment, who's involved, and then also make sure that a group, your leadership team or whoever you determine to be involved in that, is ensuring and holding you accountable as a leader for alignment with mission, vision, values, commitments, and of course your priorities for the school year, as we talked about in part 1 of our series. When you're providing anchors of support for your teachers and your instructional staff that are involved in the professional learning, make sure that they have things that they can interact with, that if there's a variety of instructional modes being used, and that the materials are easy to access for everyone during that learning experience. Again, some examples that might be involved in our sample that we're walking through. This campus focused on learning lesson rehearsals this year. You have the detailed document for this system. You have their instructional sequence that they use in their classroom. In this case, it's pretty much a well-established 5E model. And then a lesson plan that this particular campus uses to ensure those processes are being documented in the actual lesson plan that gets facilitated with students. So keep that in mind, that if these are things that are going to be part of implementing, to make sure those things are available and accessible during the professional learning as part of what makes it high quality and effective. And then a few other notes: make sure that you're modeling whatever it is that you want to take into the PLC practices or into classrooms. Provide the processing time right there. So we know that the most effective learning experiences for professional learning will have time for processing, yes, but also planning for implementation. And then again, that shared voice whenever possible, to make sure that others are involved in messaging the professional learning, modeling the professional learning, and helping with facilitating that experience. And then we get this question a lot about, well, how do you build in accountability for the learning, that it doesn't just go into the abstract after that professional learning experience together. So if everyone's together learning, how do we make sure that the learning goes beyond that experience? A couple of examples. You could have people write down an action plan. It could be as simple as a reflection or a commitment, how they'll take it into their practice. You could use a Google form or some other kind of survey response for that commitment or for the reflection or for the action plan. And also to make sure that as school leaders, this learning makes it into your processes. So whatever your plan and process and tools that you use for observation and feedback of either classrooms or collaborative meetings, all of that should be informed and updated by whatever the shared professional learning is. A couple more pro tips. Again, when you're thinking about, especially the beginning of the year, there are a lot of things that we need to take the time with our staff and our teachers, all the instructional staff with. Consider what things are aligned with your priorities, and are there some components of the professional learning that could be done independently? So if there are some things that we don't need to take that shoulder to shoulder in-person time for, is there another modality to engage? Taking attendance. This is something that is sometimes missed, but it can be very powerful for your culture and for accountability. If there's something you want to commit to campus-wide, how will you ensure that everyone has been supported with that professional learning? So if you have 75 staff members and 5 of them are unable to attend the in-person, do you have a system for taking attendance and then having either a makeup PD or some other resource to make sure that everyone is involved and it's an all-in situation? And then finally, perhaps one of the most powerful elements is for school leaders to be co-learners and participate in the professional learning with their teachers, with their instructional staff, whatever you're asking everyone to do to learn, be alongside them as a learner. And that brings that credibility to your feedback and your support throughout the year. And also you'll be better positioned to support the implementation of whatever you're learning in practice. So keeping those pro tips in mind, just want to make sure that you move forward. A few ideas here for those independent learning activities. So if you do have some learning that needs to happen, but perhaps it needs to be considering the economy of time that you have available to you, if you want to reach for independent learning activities, there are some tools here listed for you, but consider recording your own messaging about it and your own guidance about it in a video provided for them to independently or asynchronously access. There could be articles to read, research, or background learning. This can be done before or after in-person learning, or perhaps it gets staggered out, just depends because everyone's district calendar is a little different. Book studies can sometimes be transformative. Perhaps it could be paced out. And then we do have another example we wanted to share with you, and that is an interactive game board, because this one kind of takes any professional learning you put in that realm of independent or asynchronous learning and sort of blends it with some accountability. And again, you'll have this this in your slides in the example. But the idea is you can see some of the content here on the game board are some things that you would definitely want to make sure that everyone has access to and interacts with in a meaningful way, but maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be done together all together at once. So this particular interactive game board could be used in person, or it could be used, I believe this one is ready to be used interactively and online, so that you You could make each game piece hot linked to a particular resource or something to interact with. And meanwhile, depending on how you set it up, completion of the game board would end where it says finish. I've done all of these, experienced all these learning experiences, and here's my accountability piece. And perhaps the game board gets turned in or completed digitally. So a lot of different ways that this could be adapted to your needs, but just wanted to share that with you as an example of how some of that learning, that especially at the beginning of the year when we have a lot to do, could be done independently. And thank you for letting me walk you through that. Once again, we are focused on a priority that's been determined to be high impact, and we want to make sure that we support it with a system of a detailed document, that it's communicated frequently and with clarity, and supported first through professional learning, not just upfront initial professional learning, but a plan to have ongoing professional learning throughout the year. And then the next part of supporting that priority work is through monitoring and feedback. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Allison now, who's going to walk us through that. Allison, are you there? There you are. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. So yes, the next part of that process or that checklist is for us to support it with that monitoring and feedback, like Terry was saying. So looking at this checklist, we're going to dive into this section a little bit deeper in the next coming slides. So back to that calendar for support, where our systems for our support and monitoring come up. If we look at this and really take a deep dive into where this shows up for our calendar of support. So just wanted to bring this calendar back in full view. And then now we will go to the one where it shows where the monitoring and individual coaching and feedback and support show up. So if you can see here, it is continuous. So looking at that ongoing process, it is ongoing, and it is I cannot stress this enough, it is the most important part of this system to ensure that implementation. So what we know, if, like Terry was saying earlier, if we just go over it once during beginning of year PD, then only about 20 to 25% implementation is what we should expect. But if we use that ongoing support and that professional learning throughout the school year, and we give that monitoring and feedback, and continuously talk about how we can, bring up our expectations and communicate those expectations and those priorities using that detailed document, that's where we see that implementation go up to greater than 80% typically. So this is the most important part of the system, but it could not be done without those other components that Terry went over earlier. So we're going to dive into exactly what we mean now. So looking at this example, and this is a continuation of that example that Terry shared in the beginning of year, this would be that follow-up support. So after I go through that initial PD at the beginning of the year with lesson rehearsals, and I've communicated my expectations of that priority, this is where I would get together with that leadership team and figure out, okay, let's make a schedule for lesson rehearsals. Let's make sure that we communicate that schedule. And that's probably going to be a part of that initial PD, right? But during those lesson rehearsals, we show that it's a priority by making sure that the leaders are present. So what that means is that when we schedule them, that means that it is on a common calendar, and we make sure at least one leader is in every single lesson rehearsal, right? That way we can use that learning and what we see in those lesson rehearsals to follow up with our staff during those walkthrough and those observations and feedback. So another way to provide that ongoing support, as you see here, is during faculty meetings, making sure we revisit our priorities and provide additional learning if necessary. That's why it's very important that we are meeting as a leadership team and checking in on that progress and really looking at the data to inform those decisions about what learning or support needs to happen in those faculty meetings to ensure that it's very clear and it's very concise so that we can get to the work, right? And we can make sure that it's happening and get to that support for teachers. And also another idea is to make sure that you have this observation and feedback, right? So the supporting systems document. So making sure that this document is aligned to you going in and making sure that it's happening. So you can see there in that middle section, there's where it is aligned to the submitted plan and it's aligned to that lesson rehearsal. The only way I would know that as an administrator is if I saw that lesson rehearsal. So very important that I was there for that lesson rehearsal and I can say, okay, yes, the lesson rehearsal feedback was incorporated into the lesson. So that holds me as accountable as an administrator, but it also holds that teacher accountable for actually implementing the feedback that was given to them during that lesson rehearsal. So you can see both that system document really supporting that teacher. And then another example is here's a PLC exit ticket. This is if you are sharing some learning and let's say we're diving deeper into a part of lesson rehearsals that needed a little work. I can see if someone needs more support, right? Do they need my help as an administrator? Maybe it's an instructional coach that you have, or maybe they just need to go see someone incorporate that feedback, right? Or have another deeper conversation about the feedback that was given. Maybe they don't understand. So this would be a way to have an exit ticket in order for that staff member to ask for additional support. Also, we want to make sure that one of our systems that we are keeping an eye on is how we celebrate these priorities, right? So we celebrate loud what we expect. So here you can see some examples of how we might celebrate staff. This would be at a monthly faculty meeting where the admin team gets together or the leadership team gets together and they pick their dynamic DILA from each grade level that is exhibiting those lesson rehearsals. And it's when the DILA award is given, we explicitly mention exactly why they're receiving this award. So it is tied to that campus priority, and there's very specifics on why they're receiving it so that we're reinforcing what we expect, while also highlighting someone that teachers, if they have problems, they can go see, right? Or they can go reach out to. So we're providing them with more supports in a way. Because if I know that Terry got an award for lesson rehearsals, then I can go ask Terry for some advice or some expertise if I'm struggling in that area. So also another way is to bring in that social media by hashtagging your priorities as well. So here are a couple of hashtags that we would, be using for our learning, like we're learning together, and then practice without penalties. So we want to make sure that we're inserting that practice without that penalty. So we can make sure that when we're in classrooms or if we're in those collaboration meetings, we can make sure that we're shouting out our staff for, those priorities.
Allison, I just wanted to chime in here because I feel like the last three examples that you shared are maybe, I just feel like what you're suggesting is time saving. And I can't think of anything more valuable that I'd love to, help a school leader or even a teacher with, because these are things that people are doing probably already. And what you're sharing is to take the time to make sure they go with your priorities, right? Like you're already doing observation and feedback. Make sure the priorities are in there. You're probably doing some kind of celebration ritual. Just make sure the priorities are in there. So I just see this as that efficiency, which they need so badly. So just had to shout that out. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yes, definitely working smarter, not harder, right? So aligning all of that alignment, like Terry was saying earlier, to those campus priorities, very, very important so that we're not, reinventing the wheel, right? These things already exist. We're just telling you how to enhance them. And then here are some ideas of how to support those priorities throughout the school year. So we talked about a little bit about how to support them, but now we're going to kind of go into more detail. So these are how to structure your team, a little bit around how to organize your work. So first thing is to make sure that you're scheduling for it. So right now with, your team or, if you haven't gotten that team, when you get them together, figure out your calendar for follow-up PD. You don't have to figure out what is that going to be, per se, because you're going to be gathering data along the way. But what you want to do is schedule pockets of time, right? So if you have a learning faculty meeting once a month, that would be that pocket of time that you could insert those priorities into when you see the need, right? So just having that already scheduled and clearly communicating that to staff ahead of time that it will be for learning. And that way you don't have to worry or, try to find the time later. Because what we know is if it doesn't start on a calendar, it's not going to happen. We get busy and we have the best of intentions, but like everyone else, we start school year strong, and then in 3 months, we're like, oh, where'd the time go? So making sure that you calendar for it now is going to be huge in your success. And then the next thing is to make sure that those expectations are communicated and that the leaders attend. So Terry alluded to this earlier, but making sure that leaders are part of that communication of the expectations, and that is in the plan, right? So when you calendar for those follow-up PDs, making sure that all leaders are available those dates, because they will need to be in those learnings, because we show the staff that it is a priority by all of our leaders not only being present, but actively participating, right? There is a difference. It shows it says a different message when your leaders are an active participant in that learning rather than just sitting in the back getting work done, right? So staff are looking at you to see what you expect and how you are leading these priorities. So just something to keep in mind. Here is a look at a way to organize your team. This is a detailed list, and I know we're only showing you July through September, but it goes through the year and just kind of repeats this process. But you can see on here that there are weekly leadership check-ins like we had on the big calendar, right? We saw that year of monitoring, but that we have that walkthrough feedback. We check in on that progress during those leadership meetings, right? That is a standing thing every month or every week or whenever you're meeting with your leadership team. And then you can see that support is already scheduled. So the first week of every month, we would have that learning faculty meeting based on that progress. So during those leadership meetings, we're figuring out what needs to be supported in those faculty meetings. And then we have that pocket of time already calendared, right? So that we can just plug in those necessary supports for our staff. And then here is an example of a leadership meeting agenda. So that's focused on priorities. So here you can see that it's aligned to the priorities that we shared earlier, that Terry shared earlier. So you can see that lesson rehearsals are in there, that our staff and student culture is in there, and that CHAMPS expectations are in there, those classroom expectations. So looking at, yours doesn't have to be this detailed. This is just one example. The big takeaway here is making sure that you have a leadership meeting agenda that keeps you very focused on what you need to get done, and that it's very much aligned to your priorities and collecting data and monitoring those priorities. So making sure that those show up on that meeting agenda, and that some of this stuff would be filled out ahead of time, right, by the admin that's in charge of that department or grade level. So looking at, those kinds of things and those structures. The important part about those leadership meetings also is to make sure that the time is protected. We do know that admin get busy and pulled in all different directions. So really sitting down with your team and scheduling that time, and then putting a system around that, right? Who's going to be in charge of picking up the walkie when all of the admin is in this 45-minute meeting where they're collaborating about what needs to happen next in those priorities. So maybe it's a front office staff member, or maybe, it's a hall monitor that's answering those, and they have very detailed instructions on how to answer those calls and when to interrupt and when not to. And then making sure at the very bottom of this, you'll see that actionable items and when they're due, right? Very clear on here is what we're going to provide as support for our staff. And these are the details of that support and who is going to be in charge of that and when is it going to happen, so that everybody's clear on the expectations moving forward and who's expected to do what. So it's not a last minute thing. I'm going to let you read this quote by our Bambrick and Toya. And I want you to reflect on, as you're moving throughout the school year, looking at your calendar, is it aligned to what you said were your campus priorities? So if I were to, peer into your campus calendar and you don't tell me what your priorities are, I should be able to determine what your priorities are on your campus based on your calendar. So kind of, a bold statement here, but how you use your time is going to be very effective in that monitoring and supporting of your campus priorities and making sure that they get to full implementation. And this is something that me and our team does. So if you want help building and leading your priorities with your campus, you can reach out to our school partnership specialist. That's his information, Marco Pizzana. And you can either use his email or you can QR code that to his calendar and set up a informal, meeting with him. And he will kind of tell you a little bit more about what E3 does. If you have other things that, you want to talk to us about, or, we can help you build and lead your priorities. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And we wish you the best start to the school year.